Hello, and thanks for joining us on Encore. Coming up on today's show. We meet a writer who's delved into the muddy waters of race and privilege, of music and audio memory, and of rhythm and blues. Award-winning author Harry Kunzru joins us in the studio to talk about his latest novel, White Tears. Harry, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Your recent book, White Tears, has music at its very centre. It looms very large in the characters' lives. How would you describe music's role in your own life?
I am a fan. I wish I was a musician, but I'm not. And so I've kind of compensated for that by indulging my love of music by listening and finding out about it as much as I could.
Without giving too much away in this story, White Tears features a certain obsession with authenticity, with analogue sound. It's early 20th century blues in particular. Certain characters are very anti-digital. Where do you think this obsession for authenticity comes from? Nostalgia?
Well, we live in an age where everything is infinitely reproducible, and you can have a cultural object at the click of a mouse. So once upon a time, to just have the right record or to have the right piece of clothing was a sign of belonging to a particular subculture, and now that's very hard to do. And as a reaction to that kind of digital world, I'm very interested that younger people in particular are turning towards old-fashioned forms like vinyl records in order to express something more lasting, to have a kind of deeper relationship with things.
And what about yourself? Do you play MP3s or do you play vinyls?
Well, I have a huge collection of vinyl records that are all sitting in a storage unit in London because I moved from London to New York and didn't take them with me. And I've been moving from place to place for about 10 years and have always stopped myself from buying a record deck. I've been longing for one for such a long time. So yeah, my music listening life is rather attenuated from what it once was. So yeah, I'm listening to MP3s.
Okay, very modern. Now, this book also touches on some very pertinent and sensitive social questions: race, class, privilege. I'd like to ask you to read from a section of the book, if that's all right, where some of these issues come up.
Of course. The perimeter flies past, mute grey sheds inside the wire. Leonie looks over at me, gauging my reaction. "You can't choose where you're born," she says, as if she expects me to disagree. "You can't choose your family." When you say someone's from something, some place or group or category, when you say that, what does that even mean? She talks about guilt, about how her shrink told her that no one should have to feel guilty all the time. My brother feels guilty for being a rich boy. That's why his heroes are always poor or black. I told him, it's not like you're helping anyone by listening to music. No one cares if you like black people. But he respects the music. Well, that doesn't make them like you any better. It's theirs. They'd rather you left it to them. Even if you did something, I don't know, really selfless, Black Lives Matter or whatever, they still wouldn't like you.
Now, I think that the guilt that they refer to there in that conversation, it has to do with the money, the have and the have-nots. It's an interesting reflection on the world or on America today. What did you want to portray there?
Well, the speaker is a wealthy young woman, and she and her brother are both in New York trying to make it in various creative fields. She's trying to be an artist, and the brother she's talking about wants to be a musician and a record producer. And he has got this complete obsession with black music, which he sees as being more authentic than anything else. And of course, that's a very problematic kind of position. As a rich white boy, he feels his life is thin. He feels that there's some reality that he's missing, and that's what he hopes to kind of capture by not just playing, but kind of collecting black music.
And listening in on this conversation, we get the idea that character, Leonie, is a bit dismissive, perhaps, of the Black Lives Matter movement. Is that some of your own cynicism or pessimism seeping through?
Quite the opposite. I mean, I've marched for Black Lives Matter, and I'm strongly in support of the movement for Black Lives, which I think is one of the most important civil rights movements since the 1960s movement for voting.
Mm-hmm. Now, as well as racial tensions, the idea of cultural appropriation is up for debate in this book. White people and black music. isn't all art some kind of stealing or sampling?
Absolutely, and that's what makes it a very complicated subject. I think people like to sally forth and take stands one way or the other, either to say it's my right to do anything, or it's that culture has to be rigorously policed. And I want to say, as a writer, that a priori all writers should have the right to imagine anything, but at the same time, we don't exist in a vacuum. You speak from a position in culture and you speak from a position in history, and if you don't understand that, then you don't really understand how your writing's functioning.
A certain sensitivity there. Now, that question of race relations, very sensitive as it is something you explore in this novel from both a historical and a contemporary point of view. It's particularly relevant right now in the US, and my colleague Eve Jackson recently spoke to fellow author Colson Whitehead about tackling the issue through literature.
If you're talking about race in 1850, you're talking about race now. America and most countries are still pretty racist. So you don't have to push the parallels. One example is between slave patrollers, the police force during slavery. They could stop any black person and demand to see their papers. And the language that memoirists of the time in slave narratives would use to describe being stopped and frisked is the same language I would use when I've been stopped and frisked by white officers. And so that continuum of humiliation persists.
Now, you mentioned that you moved from the UK to the US, so yours is an outside perspective. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with Colson there?
Yes, I do. There is a historical continuity. But I think the most important historical continuity is really to do with wealth, in fact. Slavery ended a long time ago, but in the years since, I believe that there are structural things that have prevented black people accumulating wealth, and that certain fortunes have been built on the back of labor which hasn't been paid for. And as you say, I'm an outsider, and for me this book was a response to coming to America and trying to come to terms with the social relations of where I found myself.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'd just like to briefly go back to your first novel, The Impressionist, which was showered with praise from the critics, won prizes. One comment, however, that stuck out for me from an anonymous internet user said this...
I'm scared already.
It's excellent, and I think it's definitely true. This proved to be an exceptional novel to read while waiting at an immigration office. Could you tell us why it is indeed a good novel to read in that context?
That's a novel that's much more straightforwardly personal than this one, because I'm a child of empire. My father is Indian, my mother is English, and I wanted to write about the belonging and about authenticity and reality in relation to my own life. So I decided to tell the story of a boy in the 1920s who's born into a wealthy Indian family, but very pale-skinned. You may know that fair skin is considered a sign of high social status in North India, and so his family are very happy, but he also finds he can pass for white, and the book is about his decision to sort of become a white man, and what would that mean? What does taking up the white man's burden mean?
Now, the central character in The Impressionist, Pran Nath, he's of mixed parentage. It's a very big idea in the novel. The notion of having two different origins is seen as quite problematic and dangerous. That's happening at the beginning of the 20th century, but how much do you think it's still the case?
At home, our home life felt normal. My parents were together, they loved each other, they gave us a good life. But people would ask me on the street, where are you from? And I would say the name of the suburb in London where I was from, and they would say, no, where are you really from? And so this notion that there was some complexity to my relationship to where I was kind of forced on me, and I always resented it. And then you get a little older and you realize that the culture at large frets a great deal about nationality and authenticity and immigrants fitting in or being forced to fit in or not fitting in. And I wanted to write a book that was, in a way, against authenticity, against this idea that, you're necessarily a sort of sad and homeless, lost soul if you have a certain kind of wrinkle to your origins. And, and so that's what I tried to do there, to write a sort of almost like a fairy story, a post-colonial a fairy story about somebody who goes through all sorts of different stages. And of course, it's a novel. I don't have him having a happy time all the time.
You actually turned down a prize in the UK for that novel because the award was linked to a particular British newspaper and you didn't agree with their editorial policy. Can you explain a bit more about that?
Well, the Mail group has a particular sort of place in British cultural life. When I was growing up, they were consistently anti-immigrant. They were consistently racist and misogynist, and you know, and I felt that they had made me unsafe as a kid, you know, I mean, the attitudes that they were pushing. So it felt very hypocritical of me to kind of stand next to the editor and shake his hand and say, thank you very much for my check and my award. So I turned it down, and it became a thing, as you would expect that sort of thing to do. But I don't regret it at all, because I think, you know, the reason for literary prizes is, for the sponsor of a literary prize, is to associate themselves with the kind of cultural capital of a work of literature, and I didn't want myself to be helping them in any way.
We're finishing the show. We've come to the end with pictures, not words. You've told us you're a fan of the photographer Ed van der Elsken. A collection of his work is actually on show at the Jeu de Paume Gallery here in Paris. What drew you to these photographs?
He did some wonderful early pictures just after the Second World War of young people in the Saint-Germain area in Paris. I mean, real sort of street kids who were, you know, living hand to mouth. You know, I mean, many of them had nowhere to live, but they were sort of infesting the cafes on the Boulevard Saint-Germain and the quartier around there, and he got right into their lives. They're incredibly raw pictures, incredibly emotional pictures of a youth subculture. One of the earliest photo essays about that I've seen.
Okay, well, that show is on display until September 24th. Harry Kunzru, thanks so much for joining us. The novel White Tears is available now in paperback. Do remember to check out our website. You can also keep up with Encore on social media. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.